Hey, it's Jeff with DaringDino.com. In this video, you will learn how to fix photosphere images in Blender. I'll cover how to map an equirectangular image to a sphere, how to fix rotation in image defects, and export the image back to 2D. So let's get into it right now. So let me show you what the problem is. I took this picture with a Ricoh Theta 5 Photosphere camera, or 360 camera, sometimes it's called. And you can see that it's crooked, especially over here. These lines are not straight at all. Also, you can see the tripod that I used in the bottom here, and I'd really like to get rid of that if possible. I tried doing this in Photoshop, but a 2D image editor just really isn't set up to edit images like this. Luckily, Blender can do it pretty easily. So let me show you what that looks like. So let's jump into Blender and add a mesh UV sphere. Now, you can try to use this generate UVs feature here, but if you look at the UVs that it actually exports, you can see that at the poles at the top and the bottom of the sphere, it's not using all of the space. And for this, that's actually a pretty big problem. So let's just go to the 3D view over here, hit U, and reset the UV mapping. Now what I want to do is change the geometry a little bit to be quads. So let's just go back to default, and let's go to the top pole here. I'm just going to snap my view to the center and hit Shift S to snap my cursor to selected. Make sure I'm using the 3D point as my pivot point here with 3D cursor, or hit the period key. I'm going to delete these vertices. Alt right click the edge loop right below it. Hit E to extrude and enter to just set it in place. Then hit S to scale and 0.01. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Just go down here, Shift S to snap my cursor to selected, delete these vertices, Alt right click E to extrude and hit enter to set it in place, S 0.01, enter. And now I have a quad based UV sphere. So then what I'm going to do is just Alt right click this edge over here. Doesn't really matter which edge you do. Control E to mark that as a seam. Now let's switch to face select mode and just click on one of these edges right near the equator and hit A twice, and you should see that the one we selected is kind of grayed out. That means it's our active face, which is exactly what we want. Then let's switch into our UV editing mode here, and everything is still the same. I'm just going to hit U to unwrap and select follow active quads. And then I'm going to change the edge length to be even and hit OK. Now you can see that our sphere has been unwrapped, which is perfect. We need to give it that image that I was showing you before. So let me open that image really quickly. Just go into my assets folder here. And you can see that it is really off. So let's actually start to set up the material so that we can see how it's actually projecting onto our sphere. So I'll switch into compositing mode here, add a new material, and I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on, which you can enable in your add-ons user preferences section, and just search for Node and make sure that's enabled. Then what I'm going to do is hit Control T to set up my image texture path here, give it that image that I was using before, and we're going to switch out the diffuse shader with an emission shader. So I'm just going to hit X to delete that, Shift A, add a shader emission, hook this back up really quickly, and we're going to turn this into textured view and give it that image we were using before. Now you can see it's really messed up right now, and you can also kind of tell that it's rotated. So we can fix this by hitting T and just rotate it 90 degrees. And it also looks like it's upside down, so let's just hit mirror Y. And now it looks like it is going in the right direction. So then to fit it into this, we're just going to hit Control P and make sure rotate is disabled, and we're going to turn the margin all the way down to 0. Now it looks like it's really just on the left side, so we're going to make sure our 2D cursor is our pivot point. You could also do that with period. Hit S to scale, X to lock it to the X axis, and hit 2. And that is pretty much everything we needed to do to get that unwrapped and set up. So we're gonna adjust just a couple more things. Let's first set our sphere to be smooth shading, and let's give it a subsurf modifier just to make it a little bit smoother, and just set the level up to 2 for rendering. That's perfect. And actually I'm just going to bump it up to 2 for the view as well. Now what we're going to do is go down to shading and make sure that we're in texture view here. And then for shading, we're just going to enable shadeless so that we can see our image perfectly without the shading that the default viewport provides. Now you can see there's a tiny little hole here. All we need to do is basically just zoom in to fix that. Let's go back into vertex selection mode and make sure that our medium point is the pivot point with comma, and scale that to 0.1. And we'll do that on the bottom as well, just to make sure that they're nice and tiny. Alt right click S, 0.1. Perfect. Now what we need to do is set up our camera so that we can start to fix our sphere. And we're just going to set the cursor back into the center at 0, 0, 0. Shift A to add a camera. And then we're immediately going to change it into a panoramic camera. And we're going to hit Alt R to reset the rotation on our camera, and then RX 90 just so that it's pointing the right direction. Now it looks kind of weird. If you want, you can scale the camera down so it looks like it's inside the sphere, but it really doesn't matter, but it looks better a little bit this way. And let's make sure that we're saving our file as well. Okay, so now what we want to do is go into the camera view and make sure we're in rendered or texture mode, sorry. And if I grab my camera and rotate it on just the Z axis over to this part of the picture, you can see it's really rotated. So the way we fix this is super easy. I just select my sphere, and then I'm just going to hit R on my keyboard and just rotate it so that it is a little bit more vertical. So what I'm looking at is making sure these vertical lines match up with the side of my kind of outline here. So I'm actually going to rotate my camera on Z so that it gets a little bit closer, and then I'm going to select my sphere and just rotate it until it looks pretty close. That looks good. Now what I'm going to do is rotate my camera to the other wall over here. I'm going to use this picture to make sure that that part is rotated well too. Great, that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is show you how to export the image. If you didn't need to fix anything, like if you didn't need to fix the bottom down here, you could just render it out and it would look perfect. So let me just undo that camera move. Oh, and I actually forgot to change the camera type to be equirectangular. And one of the last things I need to do is make sure that my export resolution is the same aspect ratio and preferably the same size as my original image. So let me just switch this back to a UV image editor and pick that image that I have, hit N to show the properties over here, and I'm just going to use the dimensions of my original image, so 5376 by 2688. Perfect. I'm going to set up my output to be to the folder that I'm using right now. Just set up as a relative. I'm going to make it a JPEG because that's what I shot it in. Save my settings really quickly. And then for sampling, we really don't need any samples at all. It's an emission shader. So I'm just going to set this down to 1. And then for my light paths, I can set all of these to 1. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in by just hovering over and hit paste. And I can actually set volume down to 0 and turn off shadows and caustics. Perfect. So then the last thing I'm going to do is just set my tile size to be 256 because I can do that and it'll work perfectly. It's not going to take much to render this because really all it's doing is just looking at the emission and going from there. So let me switch this back to my default 3D view here, save one more time, and I can go ahead and render this out. So you can see it's rendering really quickly. This is a pretty slow laptop that I'm on right now, And the center of my image is right where I had my camera pointed to by default. So if you wanted to change that middle point, you could just rotate your camera on the Z-axis to change where that default point is. If you didn't need to make any edits to the image, just the rotation, this is it, you're done. That's all you need to do. But if you do want to make some edits and get rid of some of the stuff on the bottom, or say there was something near the top or the sides that you wanted to fix, I'm going to show you how to fix that as well. So there's two ways that you can fix an image like this. The first way is in Photoshop, and the way you would do that is you would basically rotate the camera to point directly at the part that you're trying to fix so that it would be right in the middle, or basically anywhere in the middle of the image on the horizon here. And then you could go into Photoshop and paint it out with the normal clone stamp tool. But since this is a Blender tutorial, let's show you how you could do this all in Blender. So what you want to do is first make sure that you save your rotated image as an image by going to File, or to Image, Save Image, and just set that up. Cool. So then what we're going to do is make sure that we have our panel over here turned on with T, and we're going to change the view mode to paint mode. We're going to change our brush to clone, and the image that we're going to use for the clone tool is our original image here. And once I do that, you will see that the image is now loaded in here, and you can see that a problem that we have is that it's not necessarily in the right spot anymore, but this should be okay for what we're working on here. But if it was a problem, you could rotate your camera and just go ahead and fix it. So I'm just going to drag this over to be roughly in the right spot here. And the image that's a little bit transparent here is the image that we're going to use to paint over our original image. So what I'm going to do is try to paint out down here. So let me zoom in a little bit to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to do a perfect job right now because this is very tedious, but essentially what I'm going to do is just kind of paint over this spot down here, and it's going to start to paint out that tripod image that is at the bottom. Now you'll have to be careful around edges, but what this is going to allow us to do is to basically fix our picture right here in Blender, which is super cool. So let me just finish painting all this stuff out. Alright, so I've finished painting, so let me just get rid of this image so you can see kind of what I've done so far. And again, like I said, I'm not going to do a perfect job for the purposes of this tutorial. I just wanted to show you kind of how to start doing that. And then what you would do is go back into your 3D view here, and if I start to look at my image, you can see that it kind of looks the same so far. So I think what I need to do is make sure I go back to my image editor here and save this image. So let me just go ahead and save as, and I'm just gonna give this a different number here. And then what I need to do is go back into my compositing view and select on my sphere here and just make sure that I'm picking that new picture that I created. It's in my render folder, and if I preview this one here, I can kind of tell that there's a difference on the bottom down there. So then, since this has already been rotated and fixed, I'm going to just hit Alt-R to clear the rotation here. And then if I go back into default view and switch it back to my 3D view here, now I can start to see that new bottom is being painted out, which is exactly what I was trying to do. So let's render this out and see what we get. And that's it. I hope you learned a lot about fixing photosphere images in Blender. Don't forget, if you want to get free resources and great tutorials like this straight into your inbox, sign up for the Daring Dino newsletter at daringdino.com/newsletter and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.